Hi, this is Doc saying think before you act. And this particular session is a review of what I call the high, mid, low level strategy of analysis. And it's just my particular framework about how to think about Capstone and how to review it. And let me go ahead and do one thing and share my screen so I can give you an idea of how I think about going about Capstone. So share my particular screen, and we can then look at a couple of things about how I go about Capstone. So this particular framework is a heuristic, kind of a framework for my understanding. It works for me, and it's a feedback and analysis, and it's a good way to look at Capstone before you make any decisions, like from round to round. So it's a feedback and understanding of the framework that use more of an active learning approach. So active learning means that you're questioning beforehand, trying to anticipate what the answers are going to be, and in that particular time, you actually take notes as you are listing, what is the particular thing that you're kind of think of. And you utilize a number of different resources. So we start off with the balanced scorecard. We move into the Capstone Courier for the mid-level detail analysis to validate the active learning anticipation type of criteria. And then we look into another report called the debrief reports to even validate what we learned in the Capstone Courier, the deep level analysis, which then tells you exactly what to do. The great thing about this is that when you look at it from this particular framework, and you have a chance to work with your team, which you normally will be doing in Capsim, you can come up with some solutions about what happens from round to round. Now, it's a good round review analysis strategy in that particular sense. And so you want, again, to keep abreast of that. So, for example, as my information says, the high, mid, low level analysis framework incorporates active learning and then the multiple resources and this consensus building. So, that high level analysis, what is that exactly? You review your balanced scorecard and you list the assumptions about the results. And so no more than that. And questions like why did you not sell the product? Why you got inventory? Why is the score the way it is? Why are some scores zero as opposed to, whatever that range is? And it gives you an idea to then kind of list those assumptions, because as you start to make those connection between ideas, you start to look at more of a systematic way of reviewing Capstone, which is always the best way to do it. If you are siloed in a decision or a specific function of Capstone, then you miss out on the whole purpose of the simulation, which is to put you at the executive level and to think about the holistic integration of decisions that affect the entire business. So if we examine this particular round, which is one I pulled out of many of spreadsheets, round one balance, we see some things that kind of stand out as far as anticipation in the high level analysis. One, we see that the buying criteria is not as high as it could be. That means that somewhere between pricing, age, reliability, and positioning, there's something that needs to be fixed. Now, that particular point right there don't tell you much, but it just gives you an idea that it may be one of those four, right? So when you look at the internal processes, the thing that stands out the most is the contribution margin seems to be a little bit lower. This would possibly indicate that the customer buying criteria is that the pricing or maybe the cost might be too high. We're not sure yet, but we're anticipating where to look at that information. Now, when we see that profits are 1.6 out of 9, we understand a couple of different things that we relay back across each of the different functional areas of the business in terms of anticipation. One being that contributions margin is too low, so prices might be too low or costs might be too high. We also see that what can contribute to profits is that the stock out cost. So that seems to be maybe a couple of products that may have been under forecasted because they're stocked out. But we also see there might be a slight edge in inventory carrying costs, which means although all five of the products are doing well, one may have a little bit more inventory than most. So that's all we can glean. The whole purpose of the high level analysis is not to find the answers right now, it's to anticipate what is going on as you dive deeper into the information that you have before you. So I wrote here some assumptions. Part of the buying criteria, if one or two of the products have not been met. This could be R&D or pricing or some other criteria. I've also wrote the contribution margin stands out. At this point, it could be the prices are too low or costs are too high. And when we talk about costs are too high, we might be talking about more than just marketing and sales. We might be talking about high R&D costs. We might be talking about cost as part of investments, whatever that might be. So profit level suggests that there could be a relationship between profits and contribution margin. Are the profits low because of contribution margin or under forecasting, since stockouts are low in that particular analysis? Now, we get to the point where we have our anticipations. We make a list of our anticipation. And what we're trying to do is clarify if those lists are born in the Capstone Courier or found in the Capstone Courier. So the mid-level analysis review means that we review the Capstone Courier and confirm your assumptions. Now, the only question here is, does the Courier support or not support the assumptions that you have? And as you dig deeper into the Courier, you start to get a sense of if that's actually appropriate or not. So the second question is, are there new assumptions that are only found in the financial statement? So I pulled up some selected that's related to the balance scorecard of this particular example. And as I'm looking through, and this is the production schedule, yes. It has a couple of things here, right? There is the segment, the third column is the units sold, all the way across from quality, MTBF, to revision date, to the coordinates of where the product is in the marketplace currently, their pricing, material costs, labor costs, contribution margin, as well as products that are on second shift and what have you. And so what our overall assumptions were that there might be a high cost, right? Well, part of that is borne out in the unit inventory. That fourth column is that the high performance and size segment actually have a lot more inventory. That certainly could impact costs, right? Another part of it is as we look at pricing seems to be okay. However, the high marketplace at FIS, pricing is a little bit lower than what that norm is. It's around 40 at that time. But everything else seems to be okay. So it kind of goes back to what we looked at before, that part of that contribution margin was achieved, but it wasn't from a standpoint that prices were too low, at least not yet. Now, as we look into the under forecasting, we see that zeros are here, which typically means that there is possible more in the marketplace that could have been achieved. But we can also look at the units sold and say, maybe there is, in comparison to looking at other players, that they did not sell as much as they could have. So a couple of those assumptions we had in the first part of the analysis, the high-level analysis, starting to bear out a little bit. Now, the other part of the assumption that we could not see as of yet is the customer awareness and the customer accessibility, because there are some things specifically in the Capstone team guide that actually give you some indication about how to solve that. But in this particular example, where production data from round one from the Capstone Courier, we have, some of our assumptions are being validated, some are not. Again, the active approach to learning means that in a simulated environment, the environment and you are synonymous, right? You make a decision, environment change. Environment change, you need to make a different decision. And so it's not like you can look at YouTube and if someone tells you this is A, B, C, D, and E, then they're taking away from the understanding what a simulated environment is. It is supposed to be simulated, it's supposed to be integrated where you can actually, make adjustments based on that environment. So product fast and feed are sold out, supporting the idea that a couple of products are under forecast. Contribution margin are low, supporting the assumption that costs are too high and prices are too low, and profit margin impacted by excess inventory carried over. This is a secondary assumption found in Capstone Courier. So when you have the high level analysis, anticipation, connecting of ideas, working with your teams. And then we have the mid-level analysis, which is looking to the capsule curve to either validate those assumptions or find additional assumptions that were not born out of the balanced scorecard initially. Then it's time to look into the low-level analysis, which I call it low-level or deep analysis. The names are synonymous. So it allows the reviewer to scan the debrief reports and determine if actions indicated in the report match what you have concluded from the high and mid-level analysis. So what have we concluded from the high and mid-level analysis? Well, we got to forecast a little better in a couple of products. We see that costs are still high. We see that costs that were high was not related to sales and marketing because those numbers are low. We see there's a lot more inventories in some places. So, for example, as I wrote here, there is an idea that maybe the team needs to automate a particular product because competitors have automated. This should be reflected in the product profile of the debrief report. And so in this particular case, I actually listed the debrief report for this particular example. The debrief report also determines kind of what the next steps. So students are always saying, okay, what's the next step? What's the next step? What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And it's like, I always say, it depends. It kind of depends, right? So in this particular case, I like the color representation of the product profile. And as you know in Capsim, they break this down by each product, and then they give you an overall average. So here we see a few things that might be consistent with what to do next. So this team, in some cases, from a reliability standpoint, needs to improve reliability overall, but specifically to a couple of different products. They also know that their accessibility is low, which is a sign about how products are moved out the sales component, and the accessibility has a percentage profile to that, and they need to improve that across the board. Awareness seems to have some traction in terms of their marketing, but not as much as could be determined there. And then the other cost adds up, but it's not so much that it might indicate that the contribution margin is pushed up by some of these costs. However, when we look at the promotion budget, we see that, yeah, there is some sizable costs that are being tied to, that margin that we may not seen. The individual reports, if we had shown those, can give you very specific examples in the same representation key and tell you exactly what to do on each of those particular products. But for our description here, in terms of describing the high, mid, and low level or deep analysis, this will suffice. So next steps in the debrief report: decisions need to be made across all products to improve quality and reliability. The promotion budget may be eating to profits. The team may need to focus on moving inventory, and prices may be too low because the good actual share and potential suggest that the team moves products relative to other teams. So this kind of gives you just a basic framework in working with how you would approach just your initial round-to-round analysis. Should you have any additional frameworks that might be okay, that's perfectly fine. This is not the end-all framework for that to happen. But students have to understand that if you're looking for an analysis from round to round where it's going to be specific A, B, C, D, that does not exist. You will develop your own heuristics about how to analyze this data. Some will be a little bit easier to understand, especially if you've been academically trained in one of the business disciplines, such as finance or accounting or marketing. Some will be a little bit harder, whereas teams may not necessarily understand the connectivity between, having trained employees well and how that might improve capacity. So this is Doc, PhD in OD and pursuing a PhD in learning science, saying, think before you act. And I'm out.